Right, hello ladies and gents, welcome to another video. We're going with a bit of a change of pace for this week's video. We're gonna run a little bit of a hand history review. So of the comments on the first three videos, like a lot of what people have kind of asked for is maybe something where we do a little bit more of a deep dive, maybe use the solver a little bit more. And as I say, I don't just want this to be a channel where I just post play and explains. Essentially, I want to mix it up a little bit. So the premise of today is I've got like 4 to 5, I think it is 4, 5 or 6, something along those lines, hands to review. All very, very different hands, some big pots, some small pots, and so on. And I kind of wanted to do like a little bit of an insight into how I review hands and then how I use these hand history reviews to go ahead and to study. I think a lot of what people struggle with, when studying is kind of knowing what to do and knowing where to start. And you hear a lot of people talk about hand history reviews and they're like, I don't like to do them. I prefer to study specific spots and be very systematic, but I have done that in the past, but these days I do like to do a lot of hand history review myself and then just kind of organically see where it takes me. My study sessions these days are very short and sweet. Like it's 20 minutes here and there, and I don't think you need any more than that. But as I say, the kind of idea behind this video is to use these hand histories to kind of gauge how well we understand the spot, gauge how well we exploit someone if we go ahead and exploit, and to kind of build a bit of a framework for improvement in terms of, okay, well, I need to study 3-bet pots, blind on blind, or I need to study how I construct my range, big blind versus button, or whatever it might be. So without further ado, let's get into it. We're going to start with this hand with King 9 played at 500 and on PokerStars. We face an open from a reg, Brazilian, good reg, definitely a good reg. On the aggressive side, definitely typical Brazilian, but also, as I say, we'll just put you into lots of tough spots. Definitely has a call button and so on, so definitely one of the better regs that I think I would tend to play at 500 and L. We go ahead and 3-bet our King 9 suited and our opponent calls, and the flop comes down the 8-5-3. Now, this is a flop where I will polarize. I will use 67% or check here with the idea of building my value range around my overpairs, which we absolutely have the advantage with. And the idea is to reduce the SPR quite dramatically before the turn and the river come down cards where, jacks is no longer a really nutted hand. So by using a big c-bet size on the flop, what I expect is to fold out a lot of my opponent's overcards. I expect my opponent to call pretty much all of the pairs. And as I say, we want to get the value quickly on this kind of texture. I don't think small bets really make sense on this kind of texture because it just leaves our opponent with a very easy call with pretty much every hand in his range. If you think about 1/3 in this kind of texture, like he has an easy call with Jack 10, he has an easy call with every pair. There isn't really any hands in his range that we're going to be like putting into a particularly tough spot with a small c-bet here. So I tend to prefer to have a check-in range and go ahead and polarize on these types of boards. King 9, where does that fit in? Generally, out of position in 3-bet pots, you're going to end up being a little bit more equity-driven than you would be in single-raise pots in position, for example. I think having the 9 is potentially quite pretty because we can pick up a lot of equity on the turn. But I would rather have King 9 with the backdoor flush draw here. I think there is, as I say, some merit to c-betting King 9 because I think you can absolutely go ahead and fold out like a King 10, King Jack, King Queen every now and again for a big size. But again, I think I would prefer to have King 9 of hearts here or something along those lines whereby, I definitely fold out King Jack of spades at that point. and I can pick up more equity on the turn than I can with this particular hand. So in terms of whether I bet this hand or check this hand, I decided to always check. As I say, in terms of my bluffs, I think we just got much better to go ahead and pick from. So we check and our opponent goes ahead and checks back, and we get the 2 of clubs turn. I think it's a very interesting spot already when you think about what our opponent's stabbing range is going to go ahead and look like. Stabbing at the equilibrium is very difficult, and it's not easy to get right. It's very easy to stab too strong or not stab enough or stab too much. It's really easily done. I think in reality, a lot of opponents don't stab anywhere near merged enough. Like, you're meant to stab quite a lot of ace highs. You're meant to stab, quite a lot of king high, queen high, jack high. But you're also meant to check back like a lot of queen high and king high. And I think it's quite natural for people just to have like king 10 of hearts here and just always stab it. And to have like ace queen of diamonds and to always go ahead and check it back. Whereas I think there's merit to both. In both lines. Now, with that in mind, when he does check back, I believe the majority of his range is going to be something revolving around ace high. And now on the turn, the 2 obviously brings ace high a wheel draw. So if we were to go ahead and bet king 9 at this point, what are we really targeting? What are we trying to do? We don't really force ace high into a particularly difficult spot unless we go absolutely gigantic. And I think the region of hands which want to go gigantic here are not really going to be in my range all that often. Something like jacks, queens, 10s, and hands like that, they are going to see bet the flop an awful lot. So it's kind of interesting to think about what kind of sizing scheme I would have here. I think I probably would polarize, but I think, as I say, because I don't have that much value in this line to support it, I think predominantly I'm going to end up playing an awful lot of check here. I'm going to have a lot of ace high in my range as well, which can comfortably check call, but I think king 9 here at this point doesn't really accomplish too much by betting, so I decided to go ahead and check again, and my opponent goes ahead and checks back again. River comes down the 10 of spades, and this is probably the most interesting decision point in the hand. I struggle to see a worse hand I will arrive here with. So you would argue that that is an argument for bluffing. But I also believe that when my opponent checks flop and checks turn, and then we get the 10 river, there are not really any automatic folds in his range at this point. Everything is a bluff catcher. And when I play against opponents who are Brazilian or know where the call button is, and every hand in their range at this point is some kind of bluff catcher, I do think we need to be careful with our bluffs, because it will be very, very easy for our opponent just to have ace jack here, or ace queen here, or something along those lines at the end of the day, and just to flick it in every time, because he will look at this board and think, okay, well, it's quite easy for him to have bluffs in this line. I have a bluff catcher, yeah, okay, I'm going to go ahead and call. Again, it's also very difficult for me to have that much value in this line. Of course I'm going to play some aces this way. I'm going to have some 10x. If I have king 9 of spades, then I'll probably have king 10 in this line. Though again, maybe not. Ace 10 I think I will have in this line. Maybe some 10-9 of clubs and things like that as well. But it is really minimal. So again, I don't think we can bet all that much. So I actually went ahead and gave up in this particular hand, because I just felt that my inkling is that I'll probably get overcalled, even though it looks like a bluff. And there isn't really too much value that I can represent in this particular line. And as I say, when the flop has gone check, check, and the turn has gone check, check, I think I'm just facing a very, very ace-high heavy range, which isn't all that likely to fold. So we did check it down, and our opponent goes ahead and shows us the ace-queen of diamonds. And that's the end of the hand. But I wanted to consult the solver on here. I want to make sure that, you know, I'm understanding the flop well, I'm understanding the turn well, and whether the solver goes ahead and bluffs the river, and more importantly, how our opponent defends on the river at the equilibrium. So let's bring the hand over. We will go bet, raise, call, and it is 8 of clubs, 5 of hearts, 3 of diamonds. So, as you can see, the solver decides to go for the 67% strategy, something polarized. Makes an awful lot of sense. And you can see that our value region here is going to be very much built around overpairs and top pairs. No surprises there. Checking aces and kings a little bit more than 10s, 9s, and jacks. For protection purposes, you know, aces doesn't really benefit from folding out king, jack of spades or whatever it is. But pocket 10s very much does. So that would be the reason behind that. In terms of our bluffs, we are already going to be relatively equity driven, I would say. Let's have a look at the king 9. So you can see the king 9 never puts any money in whatsoever. Really not an ideal one. But if we look, pay attention to something like jack 10, for example, or 10-9, you can see that there is a clear preference for the backdoor suit here, with the idea that it can pick up more equity and then be really, really aggressive on the turn and kind of just put the money in. Bluffs, as I say, they're very overcard centric. You can see this kind of cluster around the sort of middling, you know, jack 10s, jack 9s, queen 10s of the world. And I believe this is just because these kind of hands, they want to fold out what they're dominated by, and that's what we're going to do with this sizing. So if we do go ahead and bet, what we'll see, is like the king 9s folding, the queen 10s folding, the king queen offs folding, the jack 10s very, very close, you know, queen jack very, very close, king jack very close, and so on. So it's this kind of region of hands that you're looking to fold. And as I say, if you have a hand like 10-9, you don't mind folding out queen 10, right? So I think the c-betting strategy here is relatively intuitive. There's a few mergey things going on, like ace-king, just going ahead and betting, folding out 4s and 2s, but getting called by all the ace-queen and ace-jack, for example. That's always going to be in there a little bit, but generally, I think quite a relatively straightforward strategy to go ahead and execute. Our opponent, if he has the option to stab 40%, or you know what his stab size is, doesn't matter too much here, but you can see it is very, very merged. So first of all, you have a little bit of slow play in there, or quite a lot of slow play with your top pair plus. But your under pairs, your second pairs, and your third pairs, these go ahead and stab quite a lot. And as I say, the ace high does go ahead and stab quite a lot here. Ace queen of diamonds, not so much, which is one of the hands I definitely said, and obviously the hand that he had. But you can see like ace king stabbing, ace queen stabbing, ace jack, ace 10 doing quite a lot of stab. Like, I think people check these arguably a little bit too much. Anyway, our opponent goes ahead and checks back, and then we got the 2 of clubs turn. So I'm expecting something very polar here, and not a lot of bet. And this is the crux of it, because so much of our value, you know, that wants to go ahead and polarize the turn has gone into the c-bet. As you can see, we don't have very many combos that want to go ahead and pile the money in on the turn, so our frequency is going to be very, very low. In terms of who's doing better, it's literally 50-50, but we're just not overly incentivized to bet a small size on this particular texture, such as what our opponent's range is going to be, you know, weighted towards. It is basically just a lot of ace high. As you can see, 37% of his range is ace high here. So the strategy as such is designed to kind of fuck with that. As you can see, that's basically what we're trying to do with this polarized size here. The issue is we can't do it very often because we don't have a lot of value in this line. As for king 9, again, you can see quite a clear check, no money being put in whatsoever, unless you have the flush draw, king 9 of clubs. Generally, again, a nice rule of thumb is, you know, if you're not betting at a high frequency, that means you don't need to bluff very often, and then that means you can also prioritize your bluffs, so you can just pick the best ones. So your bluffs here are just, as I say, going to be very, very equity driven, partly for that reason, but also partly because you don't lose any value when they get there. Because our opponent is just always going to call down when he has, let's say, 10-8, for example. Even on a club river, he's going to call it like infinitely, and he's always going to call down jacks or whatever if he gets here with that. On the club river, you don't need to worry about, being too equity driven with your bluffs because you get paid anyway. That's very different in a single raise pot if you're about to shove for 3x the pot on the river. That's when you probably want to be a little bit more polarized and be less equity driven, because when you do get there and you 3x pot the river, you're not getting paid from top pair very often. So check, I think, as I say, understand this pretty well from my point of view. I think a very standard sort of flop and turn here. The river is going to be the crux of it, I think. I'm going to input a few different sizes in here. I'm going to give us the option for some kind of block. And let's do block 67 and an overbet and see where that leaves us. Generally, this 25-67 overbet, these are the kind of sizing options that I'll pick from. Maybe some all-in too. And let's see what the solver goes ahead and does. So we now very much come alive with the King 9. The issue, as I say, I have with this is my opponent's ranges just doesn't contain a lot of air. As you can see, everything is ace high. And ace high is very much a bluff catcher from a very, very, as I say, Brazilian and call happy reg. I worry that if we were to go ahead and bet the river for something medium, it's just not going to cut it like it does in theory. Like, you should be getting ace queen and ace king to fold the river here, and I just don't see it happening at all. So that's the worry. However, there could be an argument for doing something very, very large instead. Maybe what it takes to get the indifference in reality is to go like a 150. And then, the calling frequency doesn't shift too much. He's still meant to call some ace highs, but then at least we actually do get the indifference in reality, maybe. You could even argue for all in for the same sort of reasons. You can see that King 9, as I say, is going ahead and pure bluffing, and this was a bit of it, to say, a deviation from me because I didn't believe I would actually get it through. But in the solver, as I say, you can see it doesn't really care about that. But as I say, bluffing the river for, whatever size it picks, 2/3 or overbet, it gets it done. It gets the job done in solver land. As I say, I doubted whether this would happen in reality land or not. Something to think about, definitely. So in the comments below, let me know what you think our opponent would have done here if we'd have gone ahead and bet, let's say, 30 big blinds, or if we'd have gone ahead and bet 17 big blinds. Do you think he just always calls ace queen, or do you think you're ever getting a fold? Cool hand though. Definitely one where I think I understood the spot pretty well, and the solver agrees, so it's always nice when that happens. Let's move on to the next. What we got? 5 other hands, so let's pick a good one, shall we? Actually, 4 other hands. Okay, let's do this one. It's an interesting hand. All right, so this hand was played at 400 NL on iPoker. All the hands are from this month. For what it's worth, it's just hands from this month that I haven't yet gone through. So we raise, and our opponent goes ahead and calls. This opponent is a clear reg. Pretty solid from what I've seen so far, but I don't have the biggest sample on him, and don't really have many specific reads other than he loves a turn probe. Probes a turn very, very wide. So on the flop, we get the 8-7-3. My strategy on these kind of low connected ones is just to start with a 40%, with the idea that the board's going to change an awful lot. It allows me to bet a little bit wider, get lots of protection with like 9-8 or something along those lines. And yeah, you're not piling too much money in too early with a hand like 2 kings or a hand like 2 jacks. For example, when the turn and the river can just come very, very connected and kind of screw you. So we go with the 40% with the 2 kings. Definitely would check this back at a pretty high frequency, I would say. Knowing myself, I would have rolled the RNG on this one. I think our suits are very nice to go ahead and check back. Our hand's very nice to go ahead and check back because it doesn't require a lot of protection. I don't mind keeping in Queen 10 here with pocket kings, of course. I don't really want to fold it out. But on the other hand, pocket kings is a very strong hand and we get a lot of immediate value. So it can definitely go into both lines, I think. And I think a solver would do that. So we go ahead and get a small check raise. This should happen very often. This board is definitely equalizes out the equities and the ranges. Our opponent's raise size, I think, is very good. I think you can check raise very merged here. You can check raise like 8x and 7x for value, I think. Maybe even some pocket bears. Lots of draws and so on. I think his check raise frequency will be very, very high. As for myself, not really anything to do with my hand. We may want a little bit of a 3-betting range on this board, just to try and deny equity from like gut shots and things like that. So I might build a 3-betting range around a hand like pocket nines, for example, trying to fold out maybe like a 6-4 or something along those lines, but always get called by like an 8 and a 7. So I think like, yeah, ace 8, pocket nines, they're going to be the kind of hands that go ahead and 3-bet the flop, but I'm not a huge 3-better of the flop in this day and age, and I don't think you need to be either. But it's definitely one where we could carve out a range for that. Kings is a slam dunk caller, either way. So we call, and the turn comes the offsuit 2, the brick of all bricks, and our opponent goes ahead and uses a very polarized size, like a 120% or something like that. I think this is very good. I think at this point, his value region now is going to be along the lines of 2-pair plus. So we're looking at 3s, 7s, 8s, 8-7. Maybe a 3-2 that he check raised the flop with, although that's going to be really minimal. That's going to be the value range. I don't think you can go ahead and value bet like an ace-8 at this point for this size. I think that would be pushing it a little bit. But with certain dynamics, I think you definitely can. The bluffs are very straightforward and easy for him to find. He's going to find some flush draws, some 9-10, Jack-9, Jack-10, 6-5, 4-5. You know, there's endless amounts of bluffs that you can find in this particular line. I think it's important that you manage your frequencies here, because if you just barrel every straight draw and flush draw, your range is going to get pretty bluff heavy pretty quickly. And I also think you want to check again. Well, you want to check with a lot of strong hands to go check raise, which I think is a really underdone but very, very powerful line. With the pocket kings here, still just too strong to fold. Unfortunately, like especially with the heart in our hand, like our outs are going to be clean. Our opponent, as I say, is probably going to be very equity driven, which means he'll give up quite a lot on the river. Like the more flush draws he has, the more he gives up the river, the higher EV my call will end up being. As I say, it's very easy to be unbalanced here, I think. Imbalanced. So yeah, I think it's just a slam dunk call and we move on. River comes down to 10 of hearts. Really interesting river, not ideal. And my opponent goes ahead and bets for quarter pot. I think the key thing about the hand here is he went ahead and bet quarter pot pretty quickly, which really made me puke in this kind of situation. I think for what it's worth, it's a very, very good river bet. Like, I think the sizing is fantastic. I think in terms of who has more flushes in this particular line, at this point, it's going to be me. And his 2 pairs and sets have been very much devalued. So I think it's questionable as to whether you can still shove pocket 3s for value here. But you absolutely can still value bet it. So I think the block makes a lot of sense because it puts me into a horrible spot with the kind of hand that I have. I think we're obviously very indifferent. My worry is that obviously the draws complete heavily, you know, like Jack-9 got there, 9-6 got there, all of which I think would use this particular sizing. I think he shoves his flushes for what it's worth, but a lot of draws just completed. And there is a real question as to whether he bluffs in this size ever, or whether he, you know, if he just had the 6-5 off with a heart, he would just shove that in. or the jack 10 off with a heart, for example, and would just play shoves. And then where do your other bluffs go? Are you good enough to find a block on the river here with like a 6-5 or a 4-5? Depends how good he is, I think. The thing that really put me off this hand, and I ended up calling for what it's worth, but I'm not sure I'm in love with a call, is, as I say, the speed of the river bet. I think if you are going to play a mix here between block and shove, if you're going to bluff, you need to think about it, like in terms of the block. And the reason I don't like the call, as I say, is because I just think it's value. But I also think that he probably shoves his flushes, so I think jam could potentially be the play here. Obviously, we have a king of hearts, which is very nice. We're going to unblock basically every bluff in his range as well. But I also, as I say, think with the timing, it's really natural to block the river with 3. So I don't think you need to spend too much time on that for someone who, as I say, plays 400 and L and is, for all intents and purposes, going to be a solid reg. The other option is fold and just, because there is also, we can shove all in, but he has to go ahead and then fold sets, which is also questionable. Whether people do that or whether they just go, oh, I've got a set. If you've got me, you've got me kind of deal. It's very, very close. It really, really is a puke spot. I think if you have put a gun to my head, I would say call probably is the worst option with the information I have available. But it remains to be seen whether we should just fold or whether we can jam. Instinct says fold, to be honest. Instinct says fold is better than jam, because I don't trust people will fold threes. But who knows? So we go ahead and call, and our opponent shows us the pocket sevens for a extremely well played hand from him. I think flop check raise obviously very standard, turn bet very standard but good, river bet very good. As I say, puts me into a really tough spot here. Remains to be seen if we did find the jam whether he'd be able to fold this or not. So let's have a look at this in the solver. We open big blind calls. It is 8 of clubs, 7-3. And we elect for the 40%. The solver agrees. Happy days. So having a look at our range here, we can bet very wide, of course. We mentioned nines in terms of like maybe bet 3-bet or ace-8, but like our value region here is doing pretty nicely, and we can go ahead and bet an awful lot of it. Again, protection wise, like checking kings and checking aces, pure with certain combos here, particularly my combo, ironically. But I'm not going to lose any sleep over, oh my god, the solver pure checked my combo, therefore I'm an idiot. No, just, I'll mix them all, and that's what I'm happy doing, but it'll make the particular combo a little bit false, so we'll just have to pretend we have kings with a heart and a diamond, I guess. So our opponent raises smaller than that, so I think it was just like a little 50%. It might have even been smaller. I think it was smaller, actually. It was only 6 big blinds, wasn't it? So he check raises small. I think small's fine. Solver one's big. Don't think it matters too much. Small means he can raise more. Versus small, we mentioned a 3-betting range. Yeah, kind of minimal. 9s, not so much. 10s and jacks, a little, but 9s, not finding it. Yeah, some ace-8, some pocket 3s. But again, when it's so minimal, I don't really think we need to worry too hard about it. Turn was the offsuit 2 of spades. And I'm expecting very polar. Yeah, so well played from my opponent. I think obviously sizing is bang on. Interesting, as I say, to look at the value region here. Sets and 2 pairs, just look at how much check there needs to be with your sets and your 2 pairs here. And, that is just very simply because it's just going to go ahead and check raise them again. People don't do this enough, and, you can really punish people by overly stabbing in this particular spot with the double check raise. So my advice to you would be, don't forget to check raise check these kind of hands. In terms of his bluffs, if we just go nut flush draw, open-ended straight draw, you can see again how much check there needs to be here. As I say, I think it's quite easy for this to be overdone. You know, we have to check the 9-6, we have to check the 10-9. These are pairs for what it's worth, but Queen 9 is a pure check. It's not easy to do this. It's really, really not. So opponent does go ahead and finds a small overbet. As we can see, Kings is just purer than pure. Not folding any pocket pair here. Not folding any 8 really either, even 9-8 continues. Yeah, pretty standard stuff. Don't think we need to spend too much time on that. Some jams, you know, you're jamming jacks here with no heart for a little bit of like protection. You know, doesn't want the bad river basically. Jam pocket 8s every now and again just to stack a set. But again, really minimal. River 10 of hearts, and we have the option for block and all in. And as you can see, our opponent does really well here, finding the pure block with the pocket 7s. It is very natural to do, but as I say, the block is going to be very much a thing in this particular spot because we don't have the advantage in terms of flushes, actually. Wow, that surprises me. Usually we would. That is interesting, but I guess, you know, you want to carve out this blocking range for these sets and straights that are simply not strong enough to go ahead and jam, and then just, I guess, jam your flushes is the key. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. You may not have the advantage, but, you know, as I say, you still want to value bet these hands. They're still strong enough to do so. You know, 7 still has, yeah, 65% equity. It's just about good enough. But, you know, you very much puke when you get jammed on. Interesting to think about whether my hand bluffs in theory or not, or the kind of hand that I have, where my bluffs come from. Yeah, so I mean, pure bluff. Jesus. Not with my specific combo for what it's worth, because I don't arrive here with it, but fuck me, that's a lot of bluff. Well, it's a lot of raise on the river. So obviously our value region here, we can raise 9-6 and obviously jam every flush, of which we have many. So therefore we have to find a lot of bluffs. And as I say, these kind of hands are more than candidates. They are slam dunk river jams. Let's see how he's meant to react. This is the worry, I think. He has to pure fold pocket 8s. He has to mix pocket 7s, mainly fold, and he has to mix pocket 3s. And he also has to mix straights. I don't know. I think it's very player dependent, this one. I think there are people who are absolutely going to go ahead and fold sets here, but I also think there are people who are just never ever going to do it because they're like, I have a set, I'm not folding. Very difficult to know, but the jam is such a slam dunk with this region of hand that I think this has to go down as a bit of a mistake from me. You know, jamming is so much better than any other option, and it's so pure with the heart that I think we just have to go ahead and find it, just because we've got so many flushes in this particular line, and we don't know. This is the thing. I don't know how he's going to react with the sets. I would question whether he's going to fold them this much, but we don't know. So ultimately, I think the hand has to go down as a little bit of a mistake on the river. I definitely considered jam. As I say, with the timing, it felt very much like the kind of hand he had, but maybe I just lacked a little bit of bottle in terms of, you know, finding the bluff, believing whether he was going to go ahead and fold or not. Again, very questionable. It's kind of similar sort of river spot, you know. Maybe I'm worried about, you know, the scary things under the bed a little bit too much here. So again, in the comments below, do you think he would have called or folded sets this much? Let me know, because obviously the hand is very dependent on that, whether we bluff the river or not. Right, how long have we done? 34 minutes. Let's do another. Okay, that's a very fun hand. So this hand, again, played at 400 NL on iPoker versus, yeah, pretty, what I like to call blue line reg. Ignore the V pips because he has played quite a bit of heads up, so his VPIPs aren't actually that for 6 max, but definitely more of a blue line reg. I would say here, so a little bit too passive in certain lines, usually a little bit foldy, and so on. So he opens 2.5, we defend the 5-3, standard stuff. We get the 8-4-2, and we face a half pot. Similar sort of texture to the previous one, similar sort of size and scheme. I think his size is very good. Allows him to bet nice and wide. It's actually not that bad a board either. But we do want to respond with a lot of check raise here, and obviously our hand is an extremely pretty candidate to do so. I think I could play check call with this hand as well, but and I think I definitely would spin the wheel on my RNG here, but I would be spinning for more raise than call, definitely. So we go ahead and find the raise, and our opponent goes ahead and calls. Standard stuff so far. Turn comes down to 7. Very interesting turn. Very good turn for me. My opponent here is only going to raise 6-5 suited, and I would question whether it's pure or not, at the equilibrium at least. But just discounting the straights, I am going to check raise like quite a lot of 7x here. I'm going to check raise like quite a lot of like top pairs, which now improve to top pair and a gutter, like 8-6, 8-5. I'm going to check raise some 4-5. I'm going to check raise some 5-2 and things like that. I basically just pick up a lot of equity on this turn. And it's with hands that he simply will not have in his range. So we can look at this and go, oh, I've got more 6-5 than him, which, as I say, may or may not be true, but it's more than that. I've also just picked up a lot of equity on this particular card, so it's very, very good for me. I think the also the other benefit of this turn is it does not devalue my flop check raising range in terms of the value. One straight completes, he doesn't really have much of it. So like 4s and 2s and hands like that are still very nutted and worth stacking off. So I think what we'll do here is probably play a very polarized strategy on the turn, but betting very, very often, I think. And already he's going to be in a very tough spot with like 8x and overpairs, I think. So we go ahead and pick this sort of 120 sort of sizing. As I polarized, seems fine. Our opponent calls, and then the river is the very interesting 3 of spades. Now, we have a lot of candidates here. We really, really do. And generally, I would like some kind of blocker to the calling range. So, you know, if I did have the 5-4 or the 5-2 in this particular spot, they are the dream bluffs. 7-6, I think, is a dream bluff, or 7-5, also extremely good. And I think I would barrel the turn with those kind of hands. But I think it's such a good run out where even like ace-5 completes now as well. I think it's such a good run out where I have to reach to find the bluff, so I can't just prioritize stuff with the perfect blockers. 5-3 has a 5 for a start, so I mean that's already pretty fucking good. The 3 is pretty irrelevant, I would say, but the 5 is quite nice. It looks like a bluff, feels like a bluff. As I say, my opponent is a little bit more blue line in terms of I expect him to probably fold quite a bit on the river as well. It's really not easy to call down with an 8 or with an overpair here and do it enough, especially when the run out looks so scary, where so many of my flop check raise bluffs and turn bluffs actually complete at this point. So I went ahead with the bluff, and fortunately this time we got our opponent to go ahead and press that fold button. Looks to me like a pretty well played hand, but very interesting to see how this one pans out. Do we check the turn ever? Do we actually follow through on the river or whatever? Let's find out. So cutoff opens, we call the big blind. It is the 8 of clubs, the 4 of diamonds, and the 2 of hearts. He bets half pot, didn't he? Which, as I say, is completely fine. And we check raise to, yeah, pretty much that, wasn't it? So let's have a look at our check raising range on the flop. Value, obviously very straightforward. Some slow playing with some sets here, like slow play fours and stuff like that, which, yeah, relatively surprising, I guess. But nines and tens every now and again. Yeah, the ace eight, the eight sevens, the eight fives, eight sixes, as I say, those ones make sense. Some second pair, as I say, some 5-4, 6-4, 5-4 off, 4-3. Some of the third pair, 5-2, 3, even threes a little bit, but 5-2, 3-2, an awful lot. So you can already get the picture here that even like a lot of my bluffs, 6-5, very pure, by the way, 5-3 of hearts, yeah, raising more than calling. A lot of my bluffs complete on the turn here. So I think it's going to be a ridiculously good turn and very, very aggressive. Interesting to see if it does polarize or not. It does. Yeah, so in terms of the turn, yeah, there is a bit of a shift, to be fair, in the equities, but I still think it's a ridiculous turn for us. I mean, you just look at the two pair sets and straights, like how many we have compared to him. I think it makes sense to polarize. As I say, we can still go ahead and go for twos, eights, and fours, although they are checking at frequencies. Yeah, bluffs here on the turn, so 8-6 and 8-5 are kind of like mergy sorts of things here. 8-7 obviously is now two pairing going. Yeah, some 7-5, some 7-6, some 6-4 and stuff like that. As I say, this is where I expect the bulk of the bluffs to come from. I'm not sure about 5-3, 5-3 pure betting, but this is all fine. It's the river that's going to be the real question here as to how far we reach into our range here and how often we need to bluff. Interesting, it carves out some medium here built around two pair. Probably just jamming that if I'm being honest, so I'm going to take the medium out. Okay, so 5-3 pure bluff, happy days, but let's have a look at the other stuff. Interesting that like 7-5 isn't going ahead and bluffing. Might have actually just too much showdown value. Does it win in like a check or does it check call? Do you know, it might have a little bit too much showdown value. It beats all of that. So it genuinely might just, as I say, there's a lot of EV in check with like a 7-5 or 7-6. So it's interesting. They probably go ahead and bluff catch quite hard, I would say. Yeah, 7-5 just goes ahead and bluff catches. So interesting. 5-3, better than 7-5. I would have thought it would have been the other way around, but as I say, it looks like there's just too much EV in check with these hands. Interesting, 8s goes ahead and checks. Also super fun like this, and then something I'm working on at the moment is like finding river checks with really strong hands, because our opponent does still have just like a lot of missed draws in his range, and he is meant to go ahead and value bet an 8. I mean, there's a question mark on that, but he's also meant to hero call an 8. I would say he hero calls an 8 more than he does an overpair. Yeah, so if you block the calling range harder, then you might want to check, and 8 looks like a really good one just to check call. But yeah, I mean, looking at this, if we highlight this region of hands, which is obviously what we're targeting with our bluff, I don't think that's easy. I don't think that's easy at all to go ahead and station, you know, Queen 8 basically pure. I think it's quite easy to overfold there. But again, extremely difficult to know. But very nice that we found, you know, the line of the gods. Always a good one. So, you know, pat on the back for me for that one. But I think we understood the spot pretty well. Again, a bit of a question mark on the river as to how far we reach in, but it's good that we, you know, found the bluff in this situation. Right, do we have time for one more? I think we do. So we've done this one, so I've got an option for 2. Let's do this one. Let's do a blind on blind one. I think it's interesting. All right, so Ace 4, blind on blind. Villain is just unknown. In this one, probable reg. That's about all I've got to say on it. He opens for 2.5, which is not obviously a standard size that you would expect to see blind on blind, but it's obviously completely fine. Versus a smaller size, we're just going to call wider and 3-bet less, basically, just because we get a much better price. So Ace 4 is a hand that does a lot of 3-betting versus a 3x. But versus a 2.5, it's just going to shift more into a call, definitely. So the flop comes down Queen 9-2. Our opponent goes ahead and checks. Already a bit of a decision point in terms of our stabbing and what we want to achieve. With our stabs, I think it's quite difficult to kind of formulate a strategy here. My first instinct here is to polarize and to do something like pot. It's not an amazing board for us. It's a board I would expect my opponent to see bet relatively often on. And we don't have that many hands in our range that are that interested in putting money in. I just think polarizing makes a lot of sense. We want to immediately target like ace high and king high. And I think if we go too small, it's a bit too easy with that region of hands. So yeah, my instinct says pot, to be fair. As for where our hand goes in, I mean, it's ace high, blind on blind, so we have a lot of showdown value. But it does look like quite a pretty one to throw in there when we're targeting ace high to fold, if we're going to play pot or check. I can see a heart in my hand, so, you know, lots of future equity, but I can also see a backdoor wheel. I've got an overcard. There's lots of good things that can happen with this hand in the betting line, I think. I think it's a fine check too, and I think that's what I did in game, but I'm very interested to look at this and to see, you know, how much bet there is going to be. A good pro tip, like with wide ranges and offsuit hands, is it's very rare you do things pure, because offsuit hands, you just have so many of them. And this is why blind on blind is really hard, because you really do have to manage everything. Offsuit hands are going to go into every single line, so it wouldn't surprise me if there is some bet here, but I also think that checking back is going to be really good. So we do check back this time, and then the turn comes to jack. We face another check from our opponent, and it's kind of a similar sort of, you know, decision point here. I think I would play, well, I know I potted the turn here, and so I think, you know, the strategy sort of makes sense. Again, I'm not really incentivized to start piling money in with a jack. I think we, you know, just polarize to like Queen X or better. Queen X is going to check again very often, to be honest. But we are going to want to start putting money in with, you know, King 10 and 10-8 and, you know, Jack 9 and hands like that, which are very much in my checking range here. As for my bluffs, we're not betting that often. I would definitely prefer like a 10 or a king. But again, I think there could be some merit to this hand getting in there a little bit for like a 10 or a king river, where now we just go ahead and bluff this, maybe bluff a heart river as well with the heart in our hand. I think it's close, and again, I think it can go either way. Very interesting to kind of look at this in the sim, I think. We went ahead and potted the turn, and our opponent went ahead and absolutely snap called us, which is very, very interesting. I think this is the theme of the video. We do get the Queen River. Our opponent checks again, and I just decide to give up. As I say, timing 101, this one. When you get snap called on the turn here, he just has a piece of this board. Pure and simple. There is no 10x in his range. There's, you know, not really many hands in his range that are going to go ahead and snap call the turn and then fold the river all that much on a turn, on a river that's kind of, I don't want to say brickish because it's not, but like not much changes. The flush complete, sure, but there's not huge amounts of flushes in my range. And I think it's just going to be a very sticky, like Jack 10, an awful lot that you're not going to get a lot of fold from. If my opponent went ahead and time bank called the turn or something like that, then I think, you know, we can argue for bluffing the river to make him fold like an ace king, or maybe make him fold like a 9-6 or something like that. But snap call just indicates, yeah, really mid-strength, not going to make him fold on this river. Interesting to see if this is a follow-through as well on the river with the ace-4 at the equilibrium, because I'm not sure it is. I think it could be, but again, offsuit combos, very careful with your bluffing frequencies, especially in the sim. So I think this is a really interesting hand. I love these hands. Like, it looks like such an innocuous pot and one that people won't pay attention to, but this is where the beauty of the game is for me. These small pots, I find them so interesting. So we're not going to be able to do this perfectly because we don't have a 2.5x open, I don't think. No, by the looks of it, no. No, so we'll just live with a 3x. It's not going to make a huge difference anyway. I do 3-bet polarized though, so I'm going to put that in. Right, the board was the Queen of Spades 9-2. Okay, so our opponent, as you can see, should go ahead and c-bet very often here. He may have a different strategy on this kind of board. It's fucking difficult to say, to be honest. I think if someone's going to play 25%, they'll probably bet simplified to range, so I'm going to give it like a half pot just to kind of force the solver to check a little bit more. Yeah, that's more like it, I think. So on the flop, we do want to polarize. It uses a 67. I probably would have been potting this. That's the vibe I was getting, so we'll input that. Not too concerned whether it's pot or 67, to be honest. As I say, everything's fine. Yes, you can see a bit of ace-4. It is very much with the ace of hearts preferred. Ace-3, the same heuristic. Ace-5, the same heuristic as well. 4 of hearts, not so much unless you have the ace of spades. Kind of seems logical, doesn't it, with the spade on the board? But you can kind of visualize that the board runs out spade, spade, and guess where your bluffs are going to come from. But yeah, so I think we're on the right tracks with kind of understanding that this might be a bet, might be a stab on the flop. You've got some offsuit king X, you know, following that same kind of heuristic. Then, of course, you're going to have, you know, the king 10s, jack 10s, 10 8s and stuff. But look at the checking frequencies of these. I think it's really important because people just go, I have gut shot, I bet. Which is just, yeah, too simple for me. As I say, I think one of the things I think a lot of people struggle with is kind of putting hands into different lines and mixing hands into different lines. Like, you don't just have to put everything into the flop stab just because your opponent's going to overfold. There are many different lines that you can take, and I think, you know, creativity is key. If you want to be able to get into a complicated line and then find bluffs, you have to start, you know, putting these hands into checks and things. All right, so it does go check, check. Turn was the jack of clubs now. And our opponent checks again. Yeah, seems fine. Something medium in terms of his sizing, feels fine. Again, we decide on pot rather than 67. Looking down here, this looks like a little bit of a mistake. Yeah, so kind of just too high up in our range at this point by the looks of it. So mentioned the king high bluffs. I said I would prefer them. There's going to be these 10x suited hands as well going in there. So, you know, the flush draws that you didn't do, some of the gut shots, as I say, well, which we've already covered, but not much else at this point. Ace 2, and that's just with the same suits as before. So a little bit of a mistake here from me, just a bit too high up in our range. Too much showdown value basically with the ace 4, so just go ahead and check it down. We do go ahead and bet. We get the queen of hearts river, so we're not really going to be able to find out whether we would have bluffed our hand. Let's just add in an overbet here just to see if there's much of that going on here. Not really. So this is super interesting to see. Oh, the ace 2 is a pair in it. But like king 6, for example, with a heart, or king 7 with a heart, king 8 with a heart. You know, I know it's not the king of hearts is actually pure bluffing, but I think, you know, the point stands with the offsuit combos. Like, you do have to be ridiculously careful here. Apparently you have to check back straights and trips as well, which is pretty fucking sick, isn't it? But hence you have to be careful with your offsuit fucking king X. But yeah, I mean, this is pretty crazy. No one No human is ever in their right mind to check back a straight on the river. No one's got to a king 10 when the flop's gone check, and you potted the turn and they've called. Nobody has ever checked back king 10 here. But clearly you're just going to get raised into oblivion, and it's not worth putting the money in the solver, at least in reality. Just go ahead and bet king 10, but this is kind of why you just put into this horrible spot, and you're going to get jammed on, 14% of the time, which is actually an awful lot. Reality of the situation is that humans are never, ever, ever going to balance their ranges well enough here. Therefore, they're never going to check raise you 14% of the time. Therefore, you can value bet, trips and straights comfortably. But interesting, as I say, imagine playing, let's just look at the turn strategy of the out of position player. Like, imagine finding more check than bet with this region of hands with 2 pair plus, more check than bet, and then also going into just like a pure check call with 2 pair plus. Like, it's insane, and people never do it because like, oh well, I want to get the value now. But what about if you do get to the river here and then they do go ahead and bet king 10? Like, you play your turn value like that, right? And then they get to the river and they make the mistake of betting king 10 here, or they make the mistake of betting 10-8, or they make the mistake of betting queen 8, right? And then you just jam it into their grill and they make a huge mistake and go ahead and fucking call it off because they're like, well, I have a straight, so he reps nothing, I call. There's just so much merit to, as I say, studying the solver and just slow playing. Like, putting hands into different lines is really, really, really important, because, especially for me, there is nothing that gives me more pleasure than being able to check raise the river in these lines. Like, I've checked the flop, I've checked the turn, I've watched them pot it, they've called, and then I get to check jam the river with value. Nothing, it's like nectar in my veins, that. Because you get the time bank from people and they're like, oh my God, how the hell has he ever arrived here with value? And then you turn over, 2 9s or whatever, and you're like, aha, yes, I did. Sorry. Yeah, anyway, interesting. So definitely a bit of a misplayed hand for me there. As I say, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. Blind on blind isn't fucking easy at all. And it's, as I say, it's such an interesting spot. I love studying it, and I'm going to continue to do so because it's just endless. The ranges are just so wide. It's such a lot of fun to go ahead and learn about. So yeah, right, GG. The kind of takeaways from this, as I say, we've got 4 hands here that we've gone ahead and reviewed. Generally, I think I did okay. I think I played them okay. In terms of stuff that, how I would look to work on this going forward, it would be this, right? Which I might do now off camera. Like, go ahead and look at, okay, we've checked, flop's gone check on queen 9-2, blind on blind. We want to construct a smaller betting strategy on the turn, which I think is completely normal. How should I play my value, right? How often do I need to slow play my value in this spot? This is, as I say, insane. 2 pair plus checking more than betting for 40%. I think we could all learn quite a lot from this, and the benefits are absolutely there because, as I say, I guarantee you that everyone you play against will value bet the river thinner than the solver will here. And if that's the case, that just makes this even better. It really, really does. So herein lies the lesson, I guess. As I say, change of pace for this one. Well done if you made it through an hour of me just talking about hands. Let me know what you want to see on the channel going forward. I hope this was really beneficial to you all. Yeah, GG, have fun. See you on the next. Love you, miss you. Come on, England.